Have you ever put together a scene, turned on the renderer, and wondered why your scene looks nowhere near as realistic or cool as you thought it would? Well, a lot of the time the issue you're probably having is either poor texturing or bad lighting. Personally, I've spent months trying out different lighting techniques to find out which one provides the look that I most wanted. So I had a lot of people ask me on Twitter and Instagram to break down this particular scene which I made a while ago, which is actually what I was originally going to do, but instead I'm going to be breaking down multiple because the lighting for that one was really specific and I do use a variety of techniques. When I generally start lighting a scene, I usually find an HDRI that fits the scene or the mood that I'm trying to recreate. A great place you can get HDRIs is from Polyhaven. They have a bunch of free ones and I use them almost all the time if I'm not using paid ones. For this scene here, I actually just used one from Polyhaven, but I did turn down the power quite a bit because they usually do come in pretty bright. I actually only used an HDRI for the main lighting and no other lights because it already gave some really nice shadows, so all I had to really do was turn the power down. And I could really do the rest in After Effects or Photoshop depending if I was going to make it an animation or not. So in this case it was After Effects because it was an animation. I also used an area light here to put it under the animation null and it would follow the bike or the drone along and give it some nice room lighting. I did turn off the diffuse so only really showed on the reflections, and it's a very subtle change. So it is kind of nitpicking and the HDRI is sort of doing most of the work. So for this scene in particular, a lot of what carried the realism was actually the motion blur and bloom. Bloom can actually be a big part of how realistic your scene looks because it actually closely imitates on how a camera would pick up brighter objects and bloom the areas around them out. If you don't have this turned on, sometimes it can really destroy the realism in your scenes, so definitely try that out. In this particular scene, it did actually make quite a big difference, but sometimes it really doesn't make a big difference, you just have to play around with it. But you might as well turn it on. It does give quite a nice effect and also adds a lot to the realism. The bloom settings will be located in different parts depending on what render engine you're using. For Octane, it's just under the Octane camera settings and you can find it in the post-processing tab. And from there, you can then adjust the settings as you wish, like the glare and the bloom power, etc. And from memory, for redshift, you'll actually find it under your redshift renderer in post settings, so not under the camera settings, but in the actual render view. You're gonna have to double check this though. I haven't used Redshift in a while, but from memory that is where you find it. So another thing for this particular scene which actually really upped the realism was actually the volumetrics and fog. Adding fog can really help carry your light and your HDRI light, and especially area lights, for added realism to your scene. If you look closely at images, especially ones of landscapes or mountain ranges, you'll find that the objects in the distance are usually more washed out and more gray. This is because in the real world there is also an atmosphere and you can see it, especially at a larger scale, it's more prominent and there's less of a black point. So if you're going for realism, it's probably best to try and imitate that because that's how the real world reenacts. So for that particular scene, it was really quite simple. It was just bloom, motion blur, volumetrics, and turning down the HDRI and finding a nice position. So to show another example of a scene that was actually quite difficult to light for me was this mountain range scene that I made, which is actually part of an unreleased project which I'm working on at the moment. So I did originally start with just an HDRI and it was a pretty high power, to be honest. But what I found is I really like the GI colors or the global illumination colors, but I really didn't enjoy the way that there was no shadows and it looked really washed out. And I found that this is actually something that can happen a lot depending on your HDRI, and most of them will look really washed out. So what I do in this case, or what I did in this case for this particular scene, was to turn the HDRI down for the desired amount, seeing as this is only going to be used to provide the colors of the scene and the fill lighting. Then what I did is I actually took an Octane area light and put this where the bright point of the HDRI is coming from. The cool thing is with Octane area lights is it has a big advantage of creating really dramatic lighting and you have a lot more control than just using an area light. So with mixing the area light and the HDRI, you kind of get a good mix of some really nice GI colors and scene colors, but also you get the dramatic effect and shadows of the HDRI as well as the control. So the scene was looking really nice lighting wise, but the big problem I had now was that the HDRI backplate, which is just the image that is actually there, the diffuse, was looking kind of terrible, to be honest. It was really blown out and kind of low res, which I didn't really want. So what I did is I found another HDRI and added it to my scene, but I then only used that one as a backplate and not as a reflection colors. And you can turn this on in Octane. I haven't really tried it in other renderers because it's something that I usually almost never do, seeing as the HDRI already has quite a nice backplate, but this was really a specific case. So I used the nice lighting from the other HDRI and the Octane area light, and then also use the backplate of the other HDRI, which I really like, the sky. I then turned this down a bunch and basically spam volumetrics to sort of fill it out. So yeah, this is generally how I approach my lighting for most of my renders nowadays. A lot of it is really just playing around. I would spend hours just trying out different HDRIs. 90% of them won't work with your scene. So yeah, hopefully the scene was helpful, and let me know in the comments if you want any other video ideas to be made, or any other tips you want me to go over, like composition and stuff. Just yeah, let me know, and I hope you guys enjoyed.